Have been repeatedly assured. I apologise for the impression that has been given that staff in Downing Street take this less than seriously. I'm sickened myself and furious about that. But I repeat what I have said to him, that I have been repeatedly assured that the rules were not broken.
The Prime Minister has been caught red-handed. Why doesn't he end the investigation right now by just admitting it?
Because, Mr. Speaker, I've been repeatedly assured that no rules were broken.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister tell the House whether there was a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, but I'm sure that in whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times. And I'm happy to set on the record now that when I came to this House and said in all sincerity that the rules and guidance had been followed at all times, it was what I believed to be true. It was certainly the case when I was present at gatherings to wish staff farewell, and the House will note that my attendance at these moments, brief as it was, has not been found to be outside the rules. But clearly this was not the case for some of those gatherings after I had left, and at other gatherings when I was not even in the building.
Thank you. We need to understand why Mr Johnson said to Parliament that no rules or guidance were broken in number 10 when we have evidence that he knew what the rules and guidance were and that he was present at gatherings where those rules and guidance were breached. We have yet to reach our conclusions in this inquiry, and we will not do so until we have heard and considered Mr Johnson's evidence today. The evidence that we have already raises clear questions, and this is Mr Johnson's opportunity to give us his answers. Will the clerk to the committee please administer the oath?
Take the Bible and read out the terms of the oath.
Yes, I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give for this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you very much.
Mr Johnson, you provided the committee with a written submission which the committee has published. Do you confirm that the contents of that statement are true?
I do.
Thank you. Mr Johnson, please make your opening statement.
Thank you. Chair, if I can, before I begin, I'm conscious that we're all expected to vote in a few minutes, I think at 2:21. I hope you don't mind if I resume. I mean, it will break up what I'm about to say.
Well, we're a parliamentary committee and Parliament is continuing. If there is a vote called, which we do expect, I will suspend the sitting to enable members to vote, and we can pick up from where we left off. But thanks for reminding everybody that that's what's going to be happening.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as you've just said, there were a number of days over a period of 20 months when gatherings took place in Downing Street that went past the point where they could be said to be necessary for work purposes. That was wrong. I bitterly regret it. I understand public anger, and I continue to apologise for what happened on my watch, and I take full responsibility. But as you've just said, Chair, the purpose of this inquiry is not to reopen so-called Partygate. It is to discover whether or not I lied to Parliament, wittingly misled colleagues and the country about what I knew and believed about those gatherings when I said that the rules and the guidance had been followed at number 10. I am here to say to you, hand on heart, that I did not lie to the House. When those statements were made, they were made in good faith and on the basis of what I honestly knew and believed at the time. When this inquiry was set up, I was completely confident that you would find nothing to show I knew or believed anything else, as indeed You have not. I was confident, not because there's been some kind of cover-up. I was confident because I knew that is what I believed, and that is why I said it. To understand why I believed it, you have to go back to a time before the Sue Gray report, before the police investigation, back to a time where, as the evidence before the committee shows, there was a near universal belief at number 10 that the rules and guidance were being complied with. That is the general belief that has been uncovered by your evidence. And it was that belief that governed what I said in the House. And as soon as it was clear that I was wrong, and as soon as the Sue Gray investigation and the Metropolitan Police investigation had concluded, I came to the House of Commons and I corrected the record as I promised I would. I clearly could not have anticipated the outcome by coming earlier, because I genuinely did not know what the outcome would be, and was deeply shocked when fines were issued, not least since I had been told on a couple of occasions at least by Sue Gray that she did not think the threshold of criminality had been reached. I believe that the committee's work helps to explain why I was so shocked. You've been investigating this for more than 10 months, and I thank you for what you have done. You have had access to a vast body of evidence. You have collected and reviewed hundreds of pages of transcripts of Sue Gray's interviews, and you have analysed many thousands of contemporary emails and WhatsApp messages and other material. You found nothing to show that I was warned in advance that events in number 10 were illegal. In fact, nothing to show that anyone raised anxieties with me about any event, whether before or after it had taken place. If there had been such anxiety about a rule-breaking event at number 10, it would unquestionably have been escalated to me. We all knew how vital it was to maintain public confidence in the fight against COVID, that we should do what we were asking the public to do. There's only one exception, of course, and that's the testimony of Dominic Cummings, which is unsupported by any documentary evidence and which plainly cannot be relied upon. He has every motive to lie. Not only has the committee found nothing incriminating, it has gathered a huge amount of evidence which demonstrates very clearly that those working in number 10 shared my belief that the rules and the guidance were being followed, and that I received assurances that there was no rule breaking at number 10. The best and fairest course now would be for the committee to publish all the evidence it has assembled, so that Parliament and public can judge for themselves. Despite my repeated requests, the committee has refused to do this. As investigator, prosecutor, judge and jury, it has elected only to publish the evidence which it considers incriminating, and not the evidence which I rely on and which answers the charges. And despite assurances that we would be permitted to add material that we rely on into the core bundle published today, late last night we were told that the committee was not willing to publish a large number of extracts which I rely upon in my defence. That is manifestly unfair. Instead, and in the absence of any evidence that I deliberately misled Parliament, the committee is trying to mount an argument that I must have known that the guidance was not being followed, and that I buried in my head as we were fighting COVID was an unarticulated belief that even if we were following the rules, we were somehow failing to follow the guidance. And you have in your fourth report suggested that it must have been obvious to me because you have the photographs. So let me deal with this point head on, because it is nonsense. These photos have now been churned through the media for more than a year, and it seems to be the view of the committee and sadly many members of the public that they show me attending rule-breaking parties where no one was social distancing. They show nothing of the kind. They show me giving a few words of thanks at a work event for a departing colleague. They show me with my red box passing on the way to another meeting or heading back into my flat to carry on working often late into the night. They show a few people standing together as permitted by the guidance where full social distancing is not possible and where mitigating measures are taken. They show events which I was never fined for attending. I know the public will have had the impression that these were covert photos with their sinister pixelations that have been obtained by the media. The vast majority were in fact taken by the official number 10 photographer. To say that we would have held illicit events in number 10 while allowing these events to be immortalised by an official photographer is staggeringly implausible. There are a couple of photos where the event is captured on Zoom as well as by the official photographer, which only reinforces the point. If we had an event that we believed was illicit or unauthorised, why would we have it on Zoom when you never quite know who is on the other side? Most important of all, if it was obvious to me that these events were contrary to the guidance and the rules, then it must have been equally obvious to dozens of others, including the most senior officials in the country, all of them, like me, responsible for drawing up the rules. And it must have been obvious to others in the building, including the current Prime Minister.
Order, order. We will now suspend the sitting whilst the House of Commons votes, and we will reconvene in 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Order. We will now resume this evidence session. Mr. Johnson, would you like to resume your opening statement?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And the committee will remember I just made the point about the photographs, and I'd asked why on earth we would have held illicit or unauthorised gatherings in the presence of an official photographer. Then I went on to say, most important of all, if it was obvious to me that these events were contrary to the guidance and the rules, then it must have been equally obvious to dozens of others, including the most senior officials in the country, all of them, most of them like me, responsible for drawing up the rules, and it must have been obvious to others in the building, including the current Prime Minister. On the contrary, the overwhelming evidence which you have assembled is that these individuals believed that the rules and the guidance were being complied with. And what is so telling is the number of officials who say the same thing and the total silence of the written or electronic record about concerns that anyone wanted to raise with me. It would be one thing if the committee had come here today and said, look, here are the emails or here are the WhatsApps that show that you were warned about rule breaking before you made your statements to the House. You haven't got any such evidence because that never happened. But if you now say instead that it must have been obvious that we were going against the rules and the guidance, then let's be clear about what you are saying. You're not only accusing me of lying, you're accusing all those civil servants, advisors, MPs, of lying about what they believed at the time to be going on. And as far as I know, you're not giving any of them the chance to explain themselves with their own oral evidence. I don't think you seriously mean to accuse those individuals of lying, and I don't think you can seriously mean to accuse me of lying. Now, everyone knows that there are some features of this proceeding that are extremely peculiar. I have the utmost respect for you, the Chair, but you have said some things about this matter before reading the evidence, which are plainly and wrongly prejudicial or prejudge the very issue on which you are adjudicating. I'm going to put your earlier remarks down to the general cut and thrust of politics and trust in what you have stressed at the outset, the impartiality that the committee insists upon and insists upon in your report. The committee is in fact supposed to be inquiring strictly into what I said about rule breaking rather than non-statutory guidance, so much of this interrogation is theoretically irrelevant, but I'm going to take that in my stride because I agree with what you said at the outset. It is your job, in which I want to help you to understand why I said what I said to Parliament and whether I deliberately set out to deceive. And I emphatically did not. Your first concern is that I may have knowingly or recklessly deceived Parliament on the 1st and 8th December when I said that the rules had not been broken and the guidance had been followed completely in number 10. When I said those words, I was not trying to cover up or conceal anything. I said what I said in good faith, based on what I honestly knew and reasonably believed at the time. That belief, what was in my head, was based on my understanding of the rules and the guidance. That did not mean that I believed that social distancing was complied with perfectly. That is because I and others in the building did not believe it was necessary or possible to have a 2 metre or 1 metre after June the 24th, 2020, electrified force field around every human being. Indeed, that is emphatically not what the guidance prescribes. It specifically says that social distancing should be maintained where possible, having regard to the work environment, and it is clear that in number 10 we had real difficulties in both working efficiently and at speed and in maintaining perfect social distancing. It's a cramped, narrow 18th century townhouse. We had no choice but to meet day in, day out, 7 days a week in an unrelenting battle against COVID. I had to call many meetings on the spot and to call make a great many high-speed decisions. Yes, we certainly did have social distancing. We avoided physical contact. We gave way to each other in the corridors and on the stairs. We gave each other as wide a berth as we could. But it would have been impossible to have a drill sergeant measuring the distance between us all hours of the day and night. So, as the guidance prescribes, we had mitigations. When I spoke about the guidance being followed, I was thinking of all the things we did to stop the spread of COVID, given where we were working. We had large numbers of people working from home. We had many meetings, at least partly on Zoom. We had limits on the numbers per room. We had sanitizer dispensers everywhere. We had signs on the walls telling you which way to walk. We kept windows open and we worked outside as much as possible. Because of the particular difficulties caused by the working environment, we had regular testing, and a whole testing system was set up, I believe, on the 3rd floor that went way beyond what was required in the guidance. So if you say, how could I stand up in Parliament and be so categorical about following the guidance? What was I thinking of? That is what I was thinking of. And I know you will, as you've just done, point to the photos and then to the guidance and what I said. And you will say it must have been obvious that the guidance was being breached. But that is simply not true. My beliefs and my remarks to Parliament were indeed based on my knowledge of those events. But you have to understand how I saw them and what I saw during the period I was there. The vast majority of the events relied upon by the committee are events I attended for 10 or 15 minutes, perhaps a maximum of 25 in one case, to say farewell to a departing colleague. I know that people around the country will look at those events and think they look like the very kind of events that we or I were forbidding to everyone else. But I will believe till the day I die that it was my job to thank staff for what they had done, especially during a crisis like COVID, which kept coming back, which seemed to have no end, and when people's morale did, I'm afraid, begin to sink. But never mind what I think, the more important point is that the police agreed. They did not find that my attendance at any of these farewell gatherings was against the rules. I obviously did not know at the time that any of these events later escalated beyond what was lawful after I left. There is, of course, one event for which I and the current Prime Minister received fixed penalty notices. But it never occurred to me, or I think the current Prime Minister at the time, that the event was not in compliance with the rules and the guidance. At about 2:22 p.m. on the 19th of June 2020, I went into the cabinet room where I worked after getting back from a long external visit. I stood at my desk briefly before another COVID meeting began and had a kind of salad. A number of officials came in to wish me a happy birthday. No one sang. The famous Union Jack cake remained in its Tupperware box, unnoticed by me, and was later discovered and eaten by my private secretaries. We talked, as you would expect, about COVID and what we were doing to beat the pandemic. It is a measure of how innocent we thought this meeting was that an slightly exaggerated version was briefed to the Times with singing and cake eating, and yet nothing untoward was apparently detected either by the reporter or by millions of eagle-eyed readers. So when I spoke to the Commons, it did not for 1 second on the 1st or the 8th of December, or at any time, it did not 1 second occur to me that this event, the one event for which I was fined, would later be found to be somehow against the rules. And the same goes for all the events I attended. My belief was that we were following the rules and the guidance to the best of our ability, given the circumstances, and that was what the guidance required. You may now say that I was being obtuse or oblivious and that we should have enforced social distancing more ruthlessly, and we can argue that back and forth. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. We're talking about what I believed at the time. As for the event of the 18th of December 2020 in the press room, I was not there, but my honest belief that it was within the rules was based on what I was told by senior advisors. The fact that this was my honest belief is supported by the fact that so many other people honestly believed that we were doing nothing wrong. And it's abundantly clear from the evidence produced by the committee that everyone was operating with the same understanding of the rules and the guidance. If you want further evidence of what was going on in my head, look at the WhatsApp to Jack Doyle, where I positively urge him to get the truth out to the public, the truth out about that December the 18th event. It seemed so unfair to me, based on what I had been told, that the event was being presented as a purely social gathering on what I knew to be a monumentally busy day for the media department, when they were coping both with the emergence that day of the Kent variant of COVID and what some saw as the risk of a no-deal Brexit. That was why I was inclined to believe that this event must be in line with the rules and the guidance. And that's why I said what I said on December the 1st. As for my statements on December the 8th, the committee is concerned that I may have misled the House when I said that I was repeatedly assured that the event was in accordance with the rules. I don't understand this point. You can see from the evidence that I received these assurances more than once and from more than one person. My statement was entirely accurate. The committee criticises the fact that I had not received assurances in relation to the guidance, but I never said that I had. I said what I said about the guidance based on my own experience and belief. The committee is critical of the fact that I did not receive assurances in respect of any event other than the December the 18th event, but I never said that I had. The committee seems at times to be saying in your fourth report that I should not be relying on the advice of political advisers or even officials. This is ridiculous. I was the Prime Minister of the UK. I was trying to run the country during a pandemic. On the evening in question, 30th of November 2021, I was dealing with the emergence of the Omicron variant and the growing clamour for restrictions on another Christmas. I could not drop what I was doing, get up and go and institute a personal investigation into what sounded like a Daily Mirror try-on about an event that was now almost a year old. I had to rely on, and was fully entitled to rely on, what I was told by my senior trusted advisers. Government would be paralysed if ministers were not able to do so. Finally, the committee criticises the manner in which I corrected the record. I corrected the record on the day of Sue Gray's final report and 6 days after the completion of the police investigation. If the committee's view is that I should have come to the House and provided an inevitably incomplete account while a government or a police investigation was going on, including into events I hadn't even attended, I fundamentally disagree. At all times, I was entirely transparent with the House. I made it clear that I did not intend to comment on any of the factual matters until the investigation had been concluded. I kept the House regularly updated, and as soon as the investigations were complete, I provided a full correction of my honest but inadvertently misleading statements. I apologise. I apologise for inadvertently misleading this House, but to say that I did it recklessly or deliberately is completely untrue, as the evidence shows. Whatever we got wrong, I believe that officials in Number 10 and the Cabinet Office, and indeed all Whitehall departments, should be immensely proud of their efforts to protect this country from a loathsome disease. When I point out to this committee that this disease almost killed me, it's only to stress how seriously I took the measures we needed to stop it spreading, as I believe everyone did in Number 10, in Downing Street. It was those officials who organised and took the country through the lockdowns, which, whatever people may say about them now, were essential for public health. It was those officials who procured the vaccines that made sure this was the first country in the world to put an approved and effective vaccine in the arm of a patient. And it was those officials who helped mastermind the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe. It was thanks to those officials that we were able to come out of lockdown faster than any other European country, with all the social and economic benefits that entailed, and still to have a lower excess mortality rate than many other comparable countries. I am proud to have known and worked with those officials during one of the most difficult times we can remember. I am proud to have given them leadership, and that is what I believe I was doing at every one of the events in question. And I trust that the committee will be fair to them, fair to me, fair to the evidence about what we and I knew and believed, and conclude that I did not wittingly mislead the House of Commons or recklessly mislead the House of Commons, and that no contempt has been committed.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Before I turn to our questions, there's one issue that you raised, which your lawyers wrote to me about on Monday, and which I've replied to you this morning about. You raised the issue of the importance of the committee being fair to officials, and we would very much agree with you about that. And that is why we're not content with putting into evidence interview notes that officials gave to Sue Gray until such time as those officials had a chance to check those interview notes and to agree whether they're accurate, and then they can be supported by a statement of truth, which is like an oath, and then they can be put into evidence to us. If you would like to identify some officials and some aspects of the Sue Gray interview notes that you would like to then get under statements of truth and submit to this inquiry, the inquiry doesn't finish with this oral evidence session. You are perfectly at liberty to do that, and I would invite you to do that, and we can consider it. Thank
you. I will do that. There are about 16 points that we wish to elucidate, and it would be helpful to do that.
Okay, thank you. And we're putting now in the public domain your lawyer's letter to me and also my reply to you this morning so that people can be clear about that. We'll now begin our questions, starting with those which cover the 6 gatherings that the committee thinks are the most relevant to our inquiry. When asked in the House of Commons about gatherings in number 10 from December 2021 onwards, you told the House that COVID rules and guidance were followed completely and at all times. Following the publication in May 2022 of the report which you'd commissioned into gatherings on government premises, you continued to maintain that it was certainly the case that the rules and guidance were followed at gatherings you had attended to wish farewell to staff who were leaving number 10. We will put to you what the COVID rules and guidance were on those 6 dates, what you knew about the gatherings that took place on each of those dates and their compliance with the rules and guidance then in force. We'll start by looking at 2 leaving gatherings that you attended in November 2020. We'll primarily be focusing on these gatherings' compliance with the COVID workplace guidance in place at the time. These gatherings took place during a national lockdown in England. The legal rules in force to prevent the spread of COVID included restrictions on indoor gatherings of 2 or more people. The workplace guidance in force at that time stated that there should be social distancing of 2 meters in the workplace wherever possible, and that only absolutely necessary participants should physically attend meetings. I will now invite Sir Bernard Jenkin to ask the first question. Sir Bernard.
Thank you, Chair. So as the Chair described, we will first consider what knowledge you had of the rules and guidance in place at the time of each of the events you attended or of which you had knowledge, by reminding ourselves of what you were telling the country about the rules and guidance, and then we will ask about those gatherings. Now, you were aware of the importance of following the guidance the government had issued to keep workplaces safe. Indeed, you previously told the House of Commons on the 2nd of September 2020, and I quote, "It's very important that we get people back into the workplace in a COVID-secure way," unquote. And then on the 9th of November 2020, less than a week before the first of the gatherings that I will ask you about, you said at a COVID press conference, and I quote, "Neither mass testing nor progress on vaccines are at the present time a substitute for the national restrictions, for social distancing and all the rest. So it is all the more important to follow the rules," unquote. And at the press conferences over this period, you regularly repeated the phrase, hands, face, space, while standing at podiums bearing this phrase. So there can be no doubt that you understood what the guidance and rules meant and were intended to achieve. Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. On the 13th of November 2020, which we saw Catherine West just asking about on the film earlier, there was an impromptu leaving gathering for your then Director of Communications, Lee Kane. This was held in the vestibule outside the press office in number 10. Between 15 and 20 people were present and you gave a speech. And the evidence for this is at page 9 of the evidence bundle. Do you accept that these facts are correct?
Yes.
We will now show the pictures, which you have made your comments about, but nevertheless we will ask you about them. The unpixelated photos are on page 540 and 580 in the bundle of the total evidence pack. The pictures show you with at least 6 to 8 other people standing in close proximity. I want to ask first about this gathering's compliance with the guidance. You told the House of Commons as recently as the 25th of May 2022, which was the day of the publication of the Sucre report, that it was, and I quote, certainly the case, strong words, that guidance had been followed at gatherings you attended to wish staff farewell, at least while you were there. At least while you were there. But the photographs show a lack of social distancing of 2 metres, which was required by the workplace guidance at the time.
It was 1 metre we were together.
So do you accept that you were present at this gathering and that people were not socially distanced while you were there?
Thank you very much, Sir Bernard. I don't accept that people were not making an effort to distance themselves socially from each other, and that happened the whole time in number 10. Actually, I think that the guidance by November 2020 stipulated that you should maintain 1 metre social distancing where possible, with mitigation where 2 metres is not viable. And at all stages, the guidance was intended to be implemented where possible, and that is absolutely clear from the guidance. As I said in my introduction, it was always the case that we understood that the confines of number 10 were going to make it impossible the whole time to enforce total social distancing, as it were, with an electric force field around every individual. Now, this meeting happened on an impromptu basis. It had to happen. It happened because on November the 13th, 2 senior members of and people will ask, why was this happening? Why was it necessary? It was necessary because 2 senior members of staff, the effective chief of staff and the director of communications, had both left the building or were about to leave the building in pretty acrimonious circumstances, or what were potentially acrimonious circumstances. It was important for me to be there and to give reassurance. And the salient point I would venture to make is that following that gathering, no fine was issued to me. My presence there was felt by the Met to be not to be unlawful. They agreed that it was a work-related event, and I believe it was absolutely essential for work purposes.
Right, well, I'm asking about the guidance at the moment.
Yes, and I'm telling you that I believe the guidance
so
what you've got to understand. When I looked at that group, it did not for one second occur to me that we were in breach of the guidance, given the logistical difficulties we faced in number 10 and the need to have urgent meetings such as this.
You said, you didn't quite answer my question to begin with, because you suggested that the picture doesn't show that people weren't making an effort to comply with the guidance. I'm just asking whether the evidence is that the guidance was being complied with, and I think by suggesting
I believe that the guidance is being complied with.
Right, okay, because I'll come to that, because it must have occurred to you that given that they weren't social distancing at 2 metres, that they might have been in breach of the social distancing guidance, either while you were at the gathering or indeed, as you reflected on this afterwards, as the storm broke around your head, you must have been thinking, well, I wonder whether that was really complying with the guidance. That must have occurred.
So, Bernard, forgive me, but I've got to correct you on a point of a technical point. After June 24th, 2020, the guidance was changed so that the objective was to maintain social distancing at with at 1 metre with mitigations where 2 metres were not viable.
I'll come to that. But I think the first point is that it's fair to say that you didn't say that we did every effort to comply with the guidance of the House of Commons, and you didn't say that.
No, I'm saying that we followed the guidance completely, because you can't.
Okay, right.
We'll come to this in a minute.
Okay.
But you can't expect human beings in an environment like number 10 to have, as it were, a invisible electrified fence around them. They will occasionally drift into each other's orbit. When I saw that, it did not mean to me that we had breached the guidance. It meant that we were following the guidance to the best of our ability, which was what the guidance provided for. And the guidance provides for freedoms within the practical framework of the operation or the business to decide how you're going to implement the guidance. The measures that you referred to at the outset are things that need usually to be complied with. Businesses are entitled and asked to decide what practical considerations they wish to give to implementing the guidance, and that is what we did. Can I just say, so people understand why I believed, because this is the crucial thing, if I may say so, why I believed when I stood up on December the 1st that the guidance was followed completely at all times in number 10. What picture I had in my head, and why that doesn't conflict with that picture. The answer is that I knew from my direct personal experience that we were doing a huge amount to stop the spread of COVID within the building. We had sanitizers, we had windows were kept open, we had people working outdoors wherever they could, we had Zoom meetings, we had restrictions on the number of people in rooms, we had perspex screens between desks, and above all, as I said, we had testing, regular testing, which went way beyond what the guidance prescribed,